Hey, really important to note that a dear friend of ours here on this program and channel in general, Nicholas Reece, he had the deciding vote in Melbourne Council last night about whether or not to approve the ceasefire motion. He voted against the motion. So I know all of you have a very passionate view of our dear friend, certainly when it comes to the things we disagree with, but when it comes to this one, he did, in my view, the right thing by taking this as not the responsibility of local council. So well done to Nicholas Reece for the casting vote that he cast last night at Melbourne City Council. Now, I've got to be very honest here. I know that the Prime Minister thinks he can do no wrong. I know that his supporters in the media think that the worst of times are behind him. But I've got to say, as a person who obviously did not vote for this Prime Minister, yet still lives under the rule, like we all do, of even the ones we don't vote for, can we stop with the cringy stunts? Now, remember, there was the Labor staffer turned reporter who just happened to have his arm there to be signed by the Prime Minister, who just happened to have a texter when it came to GST and Western Australia. Now, the stunt was fairly obvious, right? We know this bloke can't be trusted. He's broken his word multiple times, so now we're doing stunts to show, hey, please trust me. And then today, rather than turning up in forums where he's actually going to get tough questions, and I get it, politicians, they often turn up on FM radio because it's all about speaking to compulsory voters who just basically want to know whether the Prime Minister is a good person or not. But I've got to say, when the PM doesn't front for serious questions or really is not able to answer serious issues, I kind of cringe that a couple of days after that garbage in Perth, there was this garbage in Sydney.
I'm calling to give you the news, which I reckon is pretty good news, that you have won tickets to Kate's Sweet Seats. You're off to Taylor Swift. Wow, you've got it on Taylor. How good is that? Fantastic. How long have you been trying to get the tickets for?
Like crazy. I've spent probably 50 hours just watching Ticket go round and round. Thank you so much.
Now, again, I get it. There are the people who pay an awful lot of attention, which is why you watch shows like this and as loyal as you are to channels like this, and there is compulsory voter world. But honestly, the cringy stunts, if it's not this, it's the dog, it's you name it, right? Constantly. I saw his opinion about who's going to make the finals and whether there should or shouldn't be expansion in certain sporting clubs. But of course, there are no serious conversations about the reality of what is happening in our country right now. And despite the fact that most of the press gallery, generally speaking, looks the other way or claps him on because they prefer his brand of politics to anyone else. Have you ever seen somebody ask the Prime Minister a question about the reality of his too little too late tax change? The one that he thinks has turned everything around in the polls and apparently is the reason why whenever there's about to be an election, he's going to be pretty at it? I mean, honestly, $15 a week for people on $45,000. $120 a month for people on $100,000. And as you know, this government is all about media distraction, like telling you that you're going to save $1,000 on petrol on a more fuel-efficient car in 2028, on the very same day that they were increasing petrol taxes on any and everyone who needs it for their car, truck, runabout, boat or anything else. Then there's, of course, the scenario of the past couple of weeks where border protection has become a major issue again. Now, I'm not going to pretend that the borders are porous and there's thousands of boats coming our way, but we know the reality of what's happening here, which is once the government turned around and said to the 19,000 people who were on temporary protection visas, after the last 50,000 people who came here via boat, and they've all been made essentially permanent citizens, the message goes up the chain. Look, it'll be uncomfortable, there'll be a bit of a wait, but you'll still end up with the full access to the Australian welfare system. Well, again, very little of this is reflected in the broader media because, remember, the narrative of 2023 was that the voice was absolutely going to pass. The reality of what they had to deal with in the final few months of 2023 was that this was a government that was really all over the shop. But then the narrative kicked in and the packer-whackers were to be applied to the Prime Ministership and it was all supposedly back on track because of his broken promise that is too little, too late tax cuts. Now, forgive me, I don't buy that. And a new poll today shows us that, in fact, what the Prime Minister has touted as the solution to cost of living is not actually connecting with voters. You see, According to the JWS survey that pops up in the Australian Financial Review, the issues that people care about, you can see there, the bigger the blue, the more people care about it. Cost of living in February of 2023 was 47% of people's number one issue. It's still the number one issue, but in February of 2024, after the so-called solution had been delivered, it's up by 11 points. Almost 60% of Australians say it's the number one issue that the federal government needs to be dealing with. Up by 10% are housing and interest rates. Down is hospitals. Down is climate change. Up is the economy. Plus, there's been a spike in border protection, which has now become a priority for, yes, just 13% of the electorate as the number one issue, but still it's up 7 since the survey 12 months ago. What do you think that's because of? The boats that have been turning up, the stories that have been around in the past few days. And interestingly, law and order, an issue that in Queensland is theoretically going to punish the Queensland Labor government. But I just thought this was another piece of data that goes with the data that came out of the Essential poll that said that more than half of all of Australian voters had very little or absolutely no knowledge at all about the too little too late tax cuts, which is my supposition is that when people actually realise how little the effect is, then all of the problems that were there at the end of last year and the start of this year, before they decided to change their mind, is that the federal government is not doing enough when it comes to cost of living. An issue that, rather than, as the professional political people would have you tell, is an issue that is going off the boil, it is in fact increasing. Look at those numbers again. In February of last year, it was 47% of people. It clearly was the most dominant issue over anything else. But now it is almost 6 out of 10 voters. So, may I say, the Prime Minister is not out of the woods on the issue that his government has made plenty of choices to make things worse. And when you've taken $1,500 off 10 million people, giving them $15 back a week is not going to change the picture, no matter how much the press gallery says it does, because they want to preserve the power of their mate.